Good morning, everyone. This is a slightly different paradigm of a class than what we typically do in Modern Masters. Typically in Modern Masters, we meet great 20th and 21st century religious leaders and personalities through their writings and through their teachings. Today's going to be more of a biographical sketch of a very influential and important leader of the religious Zionist community here in Israel in the 19 teens, 20s, and 30s and 40s. And he's lovingly known as the Admor Hachalutz, the Admor, which means the Hasidic master of the Chalutzim, of the pioneers. The pioneer rabbi, if you will, is how they often translate that term, the Admor Hachalutz. And his name was Rabbi Yeshayahu Shapira. Rabbi Yeshayahu Shapira was the youngest son of the great Hasidic master, Rabbi Elimelech Shapira of Grodzisk. Rabbi Elimelech Shapira of Grodzisk, of course, his more famous son, a more well-known son, is a personality we've discussed and learned from many times in this Modern Masters series, and that's Rabbi Klonimus Kalmas Shapira, the Rebbe of Piasetzna, the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto. And when we've discussed Klonimus Kalmas Shapira in the past, we discussed how he buried his writings during the time, those 3 years that he was incarcerated in the Warsaw Ghetto. He buried those writings in milk cans with a letter saying, to the soul that finds these writings, please see that if I haven't survived, please see to it that these writings make their way to my brother, Rabbi Yeshaya Shapira, living in Eretz Israel. Of course, by the time those writings were found, Rav Shaila, as we're going to learn about in a moment, had already passed away, and eventually those documents were brought to Rav Shaila's son, meaning the nephew of the Rebbe, who grew to be a very well-known personality here in Israel. His name was Yaska Shapira. Yaska Shapira was one of the founders of the Bnei Akiva movement here in Israel. And Yaska Shapira is the one who publishes his uncle's works posthumously. So Yaska Shapira was the son of the Admor Hachalutz. The Admor Hachalutz comes on Aliyah in 1919 or 1920, I believe. And by the way, there's a typo on this biography. He died in 1945. He died Erev Shavuot 1945, not 1943. And one of the reasons why we're learning about him today is that his yahrzeit was just a few days ago. It was Erev Shavuot, his 80th yahrzeit. So we're commemorating 80 years since the passing of the Admor Hachalutz. Now, what's fascinating about him is that he came on Aliyah towards the end of 1919, early 1920, and he becomes very active in the Poalei HaMizrachi. He is a Hasidic. He's assigned to Hasidic masters. He himself could be a Hasidic master. He's lovingly called the Admor, but he decides very, very much to become affiliated with the movement, the religious Zionist movement, to build up the Yishuv here in Eretz Israel and to see that as something sacred. And he becomes a devoted disciple of Rav Kook. And we're going to learn about his connection to Rav Kook and his advocacy for Rav Kook's Torah together this morning as well. He also travels extensively to many of the communities across Israel. Again, during that time of the 19-teens and 20s and 30s, many of the kibbutzim and yishuvim were first being built, and they were being established as farming communities, and literally people were building with their bare hands. They didn't have sophisticated equipment. They were using their bare hands to clear the fields, to build communities. And they were doing this under very, very difficult circumstances. Many of them had come as, without family. They came as individuals, either as refugees from World War I, or later on in his life, refugees from the Shoah. And he takes it upon himself to visit all these yishuvim that were being built, to visit the chalutzim, the pioneers, and to encourage them, and to give them hope, and to give them chizuk. And he lovingly becomes known as the Admor Hachalutz. If you take a look at the back of the packet, you'll see first, we're going to first take a look at the first page, the first side. This is what he looked like, in his regular Admor outfit with a black kippah on his head and a suit and tie. And in a moment, we're going to learn more about this unique personality. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of written material of his own. What we do have today that we're going to learn from is a biographical sketch of the Admor Hachalutz that was written by Rabbi Moshe Tzvineria. Rabbi Moshe Tzvineria is another one of the devoted disciples of Rav Kook. And Rabbi Moshe Tzvineria wrote a beautiful pamphlet describing Rav Shaila, as he's now lovingly known, Rav Shaila, the Admor Hachalutz, and the relationship between Rav Shaila and Rav Kook. So we're going to explore some of this together today, and we'll also learn about how Rav Shaila becomes one of the main proponents and those who assist in spreading the messages and teachings of Rav Kook, and how he helps to publish a very succinct codex of Rav Kook's teachings on the sanctity of the land of Israel, which is later known as the Sefer Eretz Chayfetz. And it's really the Rav Shaila who takes Rav Kook's long poetic essays and kind of what ChatGPT does today. ChatGPT, if I want to write a shorter version of an article that I write for Torah Tidbits, so I take my original Torah Tidbits article and I run it through ChatGPT and I say, clean this up, make it more succinct, more clear, less wordy and more clear. And that's what Rav Shaila does with many of the beautiful essays, poetic, beautiful essays that Rav Kook wrote about the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael and the beauty of Eretz Yisrael. Rav Shaila says, okay, these are beautiful ideas, but they're not accessible to the Hamonam, because most people don't have the patience to read these long, flowery, poetic essays. So he took those, and we're going to learn more about his work, Eretz Chayfetz, in a few moments together. So we're just going to begin. Let's just jump right in. Again, these are the recollections of Rav Moshe Tzvineria, Zichar Tzadik Livracha. Rav Moshe Tzvineria is one of the last disciples to receive ordination from Rav Kook. He becomes one of the founders of the Yeshiva B'nai Akiva movement here in Eretz Yisrael. And Rav Neria is a prolific writer in and of his own esteem, both his own Torah as well as the teachings of Rav Kook. But here we're going to learn a few snippets from a beautiful essay that Rav Neria wrote, a short little pamphlet Rav Neria wrote about the Admor Hachalutz, or where it says Admor to the Chalutzim, text number 1. Okay. He said, "Ubeshanat Hey Taf Reish Pei," which is 1920, Limarot Ha'idiot al Matzav Kakali Ava Ba'aretz. Okay, as he, meaning Rav Shaila, became aware of the bitter reality in terms of the physically difficult conditions, the poverty and struggle for those living here in Eretz Yisrael at the time. Amar Rav Shapira, the Kiba Hachlata Ken Noeza. He said, Rav Shapira, when he became aware, when it became known to him how difficult the struggle was here in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Shapiro took it upon himself this bold decision. What was that bold decision? V'hu chazar v'ala la'aretz lelot tziltzalei shama v'kam v'chazar la'alot Yerushalmeha lelot tziltzalei tshuva. He said he got up, picked himself up from Europe, and without being called, summoned for a position, or without hearing the proverbial call of the shofar, to come back to Yerushalayim, he picks himself up and takes it upon himself without any fanfare to come back to Eretz Yisrael. And already in his early days upon making Aliyah, he decides and takes it upon himself that he's going to participate in building up the land of Israel, bigufo, physically. He's not going to just stand on the side and be an observer. He himself is going to get involved. Banan shel kadoshim. We're talking about a son, a descendant of holy ones. Okay, Gezer Tarshishim, a descendant of great ones. Asher rechok haya mikol avodah fizit, who was in his upbringing. He's from Hasidic royalty. He was very distant from any physical labor in his lifetime. He was always in the Beis Medrash, in the realm of spirituality. Shuv kam v'asamasa. He comes and he decides he's going to be active in building the land. Pashat bigdei ben Admor v'lavash bigdei poel binyan. He took off his rabbinic clothing that we looked at the first picture of him, and he put on the clothing of a day worker. V'yatsa la'avodah yom yom b'chomer u'bilvavim. He went out every single day to work in the brick and mortar. B'chatzatz u'b'melet, in rubble and cement. U'b'chol avodah, and with all this work. He became one of the workers involved in building. Initially, this was what he initially did when he came to Eretz Yisrael, building the new neighborhoods in Yerushalayim. Who katav az lachiv bewarsa, and he wrote in a letter to his brother, meaning the PSS and the Rabbi back in Warsaw. Listen to the words that he wrote to his brother: Kibalti alai la'asot hakol b'chtei lishayer be'Eretz Yisrael. I've taken upon myself to do whatever I need to do in order to what? Remain here in Eretz Yisrael, to be able to provide for myself and remain here in Eretz Yisrael. Va'afilu lahovil zevel. Even if it means what? I have to be a garbage collector. He said, I was a rebbe. I was the descendant of tzaddikim in Europe. But I'm so in love with Eretz Yisrael, and I so realize that we need to be here in Eretz Yisrael that I'm ready to do anything, even if I have to be a garbage collector in order to stay here in Eretz Yisrael. That's what he writes to his brother back in Warsaw. Okay. Now we're going to go to paragraph where it says B. Ba'ota tkufa Hachalutzi. During that same pioneering period, okay, she'astara al kibush avodah chiyotze bazeh, gam al kibush hakarka, nechlatz gam hachalutz dati l'shtei hamesimot hachiyuniyot. V'lo rak avodah asika et chalutzei TORAH v'avodah. He says, during that same time, the pioneering time when there was an explosion of building up new communities across Israel and to settle the land and to build on the land. Okay, the efforts of the pioneers, of the religious pioneers, were split into two sacred tasks, and not only involved in the idea of Torah and Avodah, the combination between being dati and working the land. Elegam haitraut bekarka, but they were very much involved in bringing the land back to life, renewal. The settling of agricultural settlements. Ukederach shekamu et kvutzot binyan be'arim, just as they were establishing groups to build up the cities. Kach kimu kvutzat hayitshut b'shamron v'galil. There were also groups that went out to settle in the Shamron and the Galil. The gam el kvutzat ha'ela, and even for those groups. Asher ne'achos b'tzipureim b'saleim u'b'trashim, who were literally using their fingers to remove boulders and rocks. Higiu Rav Shapira l'chazek u'le'oded. Rav Shapira used to go to visit them and encourage them and strengthen them. B'drachim lo drachim. He would travel not in a car on a regular road. Rachov al sus haftia keparash. He would ride a horse through the fields and look dressed like a cowboy. And his appearance, his presence warmed their hearts. If you take a look now at the back page, okay, this is a photograph of Rav Shapira, okay, not dressed as the Admor, but dressed as the cowboy on his horse as he would travel to visit the various chalutzim, the various yeshuvim, to be mechazek the chalutzim. Okay. So let's go on. So he says, again, it's all Rav Neria's recollections. He says, "Hinei kotev Chaim Bravda Zal Chaver Kvutzat Hanetziv Bahar Knan Liad Tzfat." He said, "There's this Chaim Bravda wrote. He was a member of a group that formed the yeshuv outside of Tzfat. Hayapa Rav Shapira. Rav Shapira was here. Hevanu lefanav et matzavenu. He understood became clear before him our situation. Ha'inyanim tukanu miksat. But with his presence, our situation, our circumstances improved a little bit. Agav, he says also, the first time Rav Shapira appeared before us and as a proper cowboy riding that horse, he says, Lamanu mipiv pizmon yafeh. We learned from him. He taught us a song, a mantra, a beautiful song, a mantra. Hamosher befinu latim kruvot, and then we continued to recite and sing with our mouths as the days passed. Lapeket tsar klita, in order to ease the struggle of our klita, of our acclamation here in Israel. And what were the words of this pizmon? Ha'avar ayin, the past is already non-existent, it's behind us. Ha'atid einenu adayin, the future has not yet come. Okay, ha'hoveh keharef ayin, and the presence will pass before we know it, like a blink of an eye. Okay, im kain da'aga minayin. If that's true, what do we have to worry about? These words were famously, might seem familiar to some of us, because Mordechai ben David famously recorded a song called Da'aga minayin. You can Google this afterwards. More MBD Da'aga minayin, and it's based on these words that were taught by the Admor Hachalutz, and these words of inspiration, chizuk, that yes, it might be that our present reality is difficult. And yes, it might be that in the past the Jewish people have suffered. He says, but what? The past is already behind us. The present is going to pass before we know it. Okay? The future is not yet here. He says, so let's think about what we can do to make sure the future will be good, and therefore we have nothing to worry about. Let's focus on the big picture. Let's see the big picture. What is going to be the totza'ah, the outcome of our hard work, our struggle? What beautiful things are going to come? And therefore, in presenting this short little song, this mantra, he was machazik so many people. Okay? It wasn't easy for us to experience an easement of the pain of our acclamation. We needed to really be strengthened and feel strong in our faith, okay, and really hold tight to that. The essence of our hope was what? To think about better days yet to come. We were able to survive by what? By having embedded in our brains this vision for a better tomorrow. Because the present days that they were living through were very, very difficult. There was great poverty. It wasn't like today where everybody could order lunch by clicking a button on a phone. Okay? They lived through very difficult financial, fiscal, and physical times. We faced very, very difficult obstacles, both from within and from without. But the Admor Hachalutz, okay, would literally go to visit all these chalutzim who were literally picking up rocks and with their bare hands, okay, moving boulders with their bare hands, and be mechazik them and say, yes, it's true that right now we're living through difficult times. And yes, it's true we've experienced some horrible things in our past. But there's a bright future that's yet to come that's going to be the result of our hard work. And that was mechazik them. And ultimately we have a state of Israel as a result of the hard work of those chalutzim. Okay. So that's just a quick two biographical sketches about Rav Shaila, at least that are recalled by Rav Moshe Sinaria. We're now going to talk about Rav Shaila and the connection to the Torah of Rav Kook. Rav Shaila, when he comes in Aliyah in 1919, he's blown away by the religious personality of Rav Kook. Again, Rav Shaila is not just a stam rabbi or a regular Jew. Rav Shaila has been exposed. He's the descendants of some of the greatest masters of Jewish thought, the greatest Hasidic masters. And he comes to Eretz Yisrael and he's blown away by the religious personality that is Rav Kook. Okay, so for him to be blown away by Rav Kook, he is impressive because of not only who he was individually, but who he grew up amongst, who he was descended, who his family associated with. Okay, so he's blown away and becomes a devoted disciple of Rav Kook. Now these are some words of Reb Shaila speaking about Rav Kook, explaining Rav Kook, why he has such an affinity for him, and explaining Rav Kook's religious approach. Okay, as where it says 2, we're going to start where it says A. We might bounce around a little bit. Gadol hayar haregesh shel avat Yisrael shai mimaleh kol avyoto. Okay, great were the feelings of love for his fellow Jew that filled every fiber of his being. He's talking about Rav Kook. Avazu haita megia ad kedei mesir nefesh. Okay, v'rabot sevel v'nirdaf meshach shanot chayav biglaze. And he faced a lot of opposition and suffering throughout his lifetime from many of his co-religionists, many of the other rabbinic leaders of the time, were not on board with Rav Kook in terms of his love and embrace of those who were involved in building, the secular Jews who were involved in building up Medinat Yisrael. Okay, and therefore Rav Kook took a lot of abuse in his lifetime as a result of that. Okay. And this love for his fellow Jew was not based solely on emotions. Rav Kook had a halachic shita, okay, that was very much based in Torah sources in terms of his approach. Okay, miyosedet al TORAH, al halacha, al kabbalah, va'filosophia, uvahu nimek et avotov litim migvelet liYisrael. Okay, Rav Kook's whole approach was based on Torah, on Kabbalah, on halacha, on philosophy. Okay, he built this entire orientation towards loving every Jew endlessly, to have no limits to his love for his fellow Jew. Okay, v'lo rak l'tzadikim shebem, and not only the righteous amongst the Jewish people, kigam le'ele shepirshu midarchei hachayim, but even those who have walked away from the ways of Torah. Now he continues. Reb Shaila continues to describe his offer of Kook. And even when it comes to the idea of building up the land of Israel and the Zionist ideal, okay, Rav Kook had a very unique approach, says Rav Shaila, okay? He says, Hura b'tzionut lo rak tnuach umerit medinit sha'uma nirdefet hamechapeset la miklat miminah. He did not see Zionism as solely what? A modern movement to take a people that was struggling to find its place in the world, to have a place of refuge from those who were antagonistic towards the Jewish people. Kim Reishit Tkumat Yisrael Holech V'nior Mimkomo Lashuv L'Makar Machatzavto. But rather, he saw it as the beginning of what? A return of the Jewish people to the source of our existence, from where we emanate. The Jewish people were coming home to where our lives as a nation began. Amnam, but it's true. Hu ro'et kol otam advarim amachivin nefesh hayadut shomer Torah shedafku b'darchei hagshama shel tzionut. Certainly, Rav Kook recognized and saw also the issues that troubled the other rabbis, okay, in terms of the movement of Zionism. He wasn't oblivious to the challenges. Certainly Rav Kook saw them. Ulam hu ro'eh be'ele et hakotzim hasovavim et Shoshana. He saw them as the proverbial thorns that surround the rose. By the way, we've learned in this class before in Modern Masters, another one of Rav Kook's great disciples, Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap. Okay, because this idea from Rav Charlap really sums up this point in terms of Rav Kook's shita. Okay, Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap famously taught about, there's a poem that we say after we read the Megillah on Purim. The poem is called Shoshanat Yaakov, the rose of Yaakov, right? The rose of Jacob. And Rav Charlap asked, why is it that the Jewish people are called the rose of Yaakov? And he uses this analogy that Rav Shaila uses to describe Rav Kook's whole approach as well, which is what? That the Jewish people are that proverbial rose. The Jewish people, what is a rose? A rose can only blossom and be fragrant, maintain its fragrance, when it's attached to its thorny stem. The minute you take it away from that stem and detach it from its thorns, then it loses its pungency, its fragrance, its vitality. He says so too, the various thorny moments in Jewish history, both in terms of from without, from our enemies, as well as from within. The things that maybe we see that are not the brightest, most beautiful things, the things that might trouble us, that might seem like thorns, they're also contributing ultimately to the vitality and the beauty of that rose. And therefore, says Rav Shaila, in describing Rav Kook, he used that same analogy. How did Rav Kook see the problems that were associated, the potential religious problems associated with those who were involved in the enterprise of Zionism? He saw them as the thorns that surround the rose, meaning they're contributing. They may be thorns now, they may not be pretty now, but they're contributing ultimately to what? To the vitality of that beautiful rose that is the Jewish people. Okay? At Sri Haklipa, so then he goes on to this, and he uses a very interesting analogy. At Sri Haklipa mechasim al kol garin shel hatzmacha. He says, when you think about any time you're planting seeds, and that's what we were doing. We're beginning to plant seeds here. Anytime you plant seeds, what has to happen? The seeds have a shell, a klipa, and that klipa has to decay and rot, and then from that comes new life. He says, so too. Therefore, Rav Kook believed that all the problematic ideas would also eventually decay, like the proverbial shell of a seed, as that movement continues to blossom and grow, and ultimately that will one day dissipate. V'gulat Yisrael tofia v'shleimata v'tarata, and the redemption of the Jewish people will come to fruition completely and in purity. Huya batuach shekashem shenarim kvar hanitzanim shel tchiyat Yisrael hagashmit kach yiru v'yitkalu b'karov gam hanitzanim shel tchiyat hakodesh b'Yisrael. Rav Kook was certain, says Rav Shaila, that just as we begin to see the physical sprouts take place here in Eretz Yisrael, that soon, one day, we will also be zocheh to see the spiritual redemptive sprouts take root as well. Hu haya ha'ma'or gadol. This is the last line. Rav Kook was the great source of light. Sha'ir l'chol halavavot sheb'Yisrael l'krovim u'rechokim. Rav Kook was a great source of light that enlightened and inspired every single heart amongst the Jewish people, both those who were already close to Torah and those who were distant from Torah. So we just turn the page. Just want to do maybe two last paragraphs here of Rav Shaila describing his affinity for Rav Kook. He says, the second paragraph in B, also the Zionist movement, even though many of its founders would say the Zionist movement is completely secular, okay? Rav Kook said it was certain to him that what? The source, Zionism came into the world from a heightened, a lofty, holy source. Ein hi stam tnuah sh'am shinoi ba'olam holech levakesh lo miklat batuach mirodfav. It's not simply that the Jewish people, who were hated by many of the other nations of the world, were seeking a place of refuge from those who pursued and tried to kill us. Ki'im hi kula kodesh, but rather that it's completely holy. V'cho ha'pu'olot ha'muchavanot l'matrazo, and all the activities to build up the yeshuv here in Eretz Yisrael, ha'politiim v'ha'masiyim, both politically, diplomatically, as well as physically, okay? Kulam yesh b'hem inyanim niskavim v'ne'elim. All of them contain within them what? Many, many holy and lofty nikudot, sparks of holiness. Mitoch hashkafa zu hityaches harav zal bi'ahava b'rachamim le'ela shitrachaku mimakor yahudut. And says Rishaila, based on this whole orientation, Rav Kook had endless love and compassion for those who were distant from Judaism, Meor Torah v'mitzvot, from the light of Torah and mitzvot, v'ishtadel l'kirvam lachnisam tachat kanfei hashchina, and he worked tirelessly to bring them closer. V'atach chesed gam klapei hamitnagdim yamin, and he also treated with kindness those who were against his approach to the right. And he recognized their value, okay, of their approach as well. What did Rav Kook strive to do? And this is what Rav Shaila fell in love with. He strove to unite both the right and the left, and to encourage them to see and bring forth the lofty, the higher purpose in each of those approaches. And that was only one person could accomplish this, says Rav Shaila. Okay, to encourage both the right to see the good in the left and the left to see the good in the right. There was only one individual in there, said Rav Shaila, the Admor, again, descendant of Hasidic masters, and there was one individual who had that koach, that capacity. And who was that one individual? It was Rav Kook. So Shaila becomes a devoted student of Rav Kook and his approach. And it's, as we mentioned in the introduction, Shaila takes it upon himself to go through the many, many notebooks and writings of Rav Kook, many essays and writings of Rav Kook that are very long and poetic, beautiful language, speaking about the beauty and sanctity of the land of Israel. And Rav Shaila takes it upon himself to put together a beautiful short pamphlet called Eretz Chayfetz. It's not so short, it's like 12 prakim in the end. But he basically takes these longer essays and distills them into, a few sentences, to where you get the basic gist of Rav Kook's beautiful ideas, but without having to wade through the difficult poetic language. Okay, so look at Rav Shaila. Look at the description of what motivated him to write, to organize, to edit the Sefer Eretz Chayfetz. This is 3. Mishnat Eretz Yisrael Shal Harav Lo Bevarachat Nishnata. The teachings and the worldview of Rav Kook about the sanctity of Eretz Yisrael, it's not, you can't get it all in one moment. Ela Megillah Nina. There are many scrolls upon scrolls, manuscripts. Okay, Psuraita al Panei Morchot Ketivato Hamigvot B'Mamarav Ubigrotav. It's spread out throughout all his many writings and letters and speeches and teachings. And especially since most of his writings were not published in his lifetime. That even those who have been published up till now, it's difficult to understand the idea and to connect from idea to idea. The ideas that are very, very lofty, okay, beyond sometimes seemingly beyond the comprehension capabilities of the average human being. Asher befi kitvo besagno behagioti apioti shel Rav, and of course they're written in a very lofty poetic style of Rav Kook. Kiblu panim chadashot, but all those ideas they received what? A new face. V'asher chom rucho, but it maintained the warmth of their spirit. Lahat nishmato niko lahem otzma rabba the karina chazaka. But by putting together this beautiful likud, he was able to share the warmth and beauty and spiritual inspiration and depth of Rav Kook's teachings to a wider audience. Harav lo ayef milisei tvaro kedushat Eretz Yisrael ubinyaneha ba'al peh b'nichtav. He says Rav Kook never was exhausted to speak about and write about the sanctity of the land of Israel and building it up, both speaking about it as well as writing. In every circumstance, in every moment. Admor Hachalutz, Rav Yishai Shapira Zal, Nechlatz Lakate et Pnine Amrav Shel Rav, and the Admor Hachalutz, Rabbi Shaila Shapira, he took it upon himself. He was inspired to gather together and edit all the essential ideas of Rav Kook, Erechotam b'merachanah, and put them together in an organized, systematic, beautiful work, Shal Yudbet Prakim, of 12 chapters, V'karaotam b'shem Hayalehem, and called them by an appropriate name, Eretz Chayfetz, the land we desire. Leket Zed Nidfas B'Yushalayim B'Chorf Hey Tuf Resh Tzadi. It was published in 1939. So Rav Kook died in 1935. Eretz Chayfetz was published in 1939. Okay, so Rav Shapira, who became a devoted disciple of Rav Kook, he made it his life's work. The one written work that we have of Rav Shaila is not really his Torah. He took it upon himself to publish posthumously these beautiful teachings from Rav Kook. Zachar Rabbi Yishai Shapira Zal, therefore Yishai merited l'shamei shofar l'kolo shamaran harav zatzal. He becomes, so to speak, the shofar, the sound piece of Rav Kook Zatzal. Kol Hashem b'kocha shel Torah, the proverbial voice of God, the power of Torah. Kol b'rama asher patach sharim, the call, the voice, the sound that opens up the gates in heaven. Sha'arei ha'ta'arot liftut am Hashem, the gates that will bring forth the redemption of the Jewish people, Gulat Nachlat Hashem, and the redemption of the land of God, La'aliyah, L'tzion, L'vinyan Yerushalayim, and call them to come and make Aliyah, to build up Zion and Yerushalayim. Rav Shaila really is the first person to seek and to make, not only to seek to do this, but to actually achieve this, to make the beautiful teachings of Rav Kook, the powerful teachings of Rav Kook, accessible to the Amanav. What? And there it's Chayfetz. No, I don't think there's an English version. But we're going to learn one last snippet of an actual essay that Rav Shaila did write himself that is translated into English. Okay, this is the last page on your sheets. Okay, this is a short passage from a longer essay called V'asita et hatov et hayashar, that you should do the good and that which is just. Okay, and again, this is Rav Shaila's own words translated into English. One who wishes to observe the Torah in its entirety cannot be satisfied with observance of the explicit laws. He must also investigate deeply after the lofty goal implied by those laws and to strive to achieve that goal. There are really some things that are permitted by the law and have been prohibited only because of the pasuk, V'asita tov yashar b'nei Hashem. You should do that which is just and good in the eyes of God. Now, when we are returning to our land and wish to establish authentic Jewish life here, it is our obligation to again set up for ourselves this goal of sanctifying life in all its depth and breadth. We must create here a way of life that will not only be permissible according to the law, but also in terms of you shall be holy, as well as you shall do that which is good, just and good. The vision for the Yeshuv here in Eretz Yisrael, shared by both Rav Kook and Rav Shaila, the Admor Hachalutz, was a vision of holiness, okay, moving beyond that which is quote unquote permitted by the letter of the law, to embrace justice and goodness for all. V'asita tov yashar b'nei Hashem, to build a society that's based on a life of values, of holiness, of achdut, of yashrut, of concern for one another, of seeing the good in every single member of Klal Yisrael. And this is the legacy both of Rav Kook, who we've heard from many, many times, but particularly the legacy of the Admor Hachalutz. Again, and this morning, being that it's now his yahrzeit was Erev Shavuot, his 80th yahrzeit, being that he was such an important figure during those difficult years of the enterprise to build the state of Israel, and such an important figure in terms of promulgating the Torah, of the powerful Torah of Kook that we all have embraced and resonates so powerfully with each and every single one of us. He's a personality that sadly often goes overlooked, is not well known. And I thought this morning, that's why we did this morning, I thought it would be only appropriate that we recall, and as we commemorate 80 years since his passing, that we recall on some level this giant of humility, who could have been his own great, had his own great Hasidic court, who took off the cloak of the Admor in order to wear the cloak of the cowboy and be able to travel and give chizik to the Chalutzim, and who takes upon himself not to publish his own writings, but to make the writings of his teacher, his beloved teacher of Kook, accessible to the Hamonam. He's a very, very important personality. I'm glad we got to at least get a quick glimpse and learn a little bit from him and about him this morning. Have a great Shabbos.